Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and we are going to have a conversation about morality in gaming and moral decisions and all that kind of stuff. So, it's a very interesting topic, one that can sometimes be a wee bit polarising, I think, but let's talk about what we mean by morality first. So, the word comes from Latin moralitas, which means manner, character, and proper behaviour. So, in essence, it's about knowing the difference between right and wrong. Like Lucy's golden rule, treat others as you would like them to treat you. So, it's a set of principles that dictate what's acceptable and what's not. It can come from culture, philosophy, religion, or some universal standards, like the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Things like the right to life and freedom of speech that everyone wants to defend, usually when they're being called out for saying something horrible. But freedom of expression doesn't mean freedom from consequences, but there are social standards, these unwritten rules of decorum and behaviour that everyone is expected to follow. But morally good and morally evil is far from universal, and it is something that can shift over time. It was, at one point in history, acceptable to take people from their homes and sell them as slaves. Now, the world has largely agreed that's an evil thing to do. It's now illegal. And it's something like, well, this is wrong. We can't do this. We're not doing it, and that's generally accepted. However, it's important to note that the law doesn't dictate morality. So just because something is legal, that doesn't mean it's a good thing, and something illegal is not necessarily a bad thing. We have to kind of bear that in mind. There are some moral standards that are pretty much universal. Murdering people is illegal, stealing from people is illegal, sexual assault is illegal, mistreating animals is legal. We can hopefully agree that these things are morally reprehensible and shouldn't be allowed to happen. But of course, just because something is immoral or illegal, it doesn't mean it never happens, such as the nature of humanity. So, talking about karma, because that's something that's used in the Fallout games and it's kind of related to this whole conversation. So, it's a term that comes from India. It's a Sanskrit word that refers to cause and effect. So, an individual's intent and actions having an impact on their future. It is sometimes tied to the sort of rebirths in Buddhism and related faiths and the concept of nirvana. And there's other words that you might hear in this kind of context that, especially when we look at it from a religious point of view, so things like sins for evil deeds, vices for maybe less evil and more just morally questionable things, and virtues being good things, so patience is a virtue, and I think most of us know the 7 deadly sins of wrath, lust, sloth, pride, envy, gluttony, and greed. From an author's perspective, when we're creating characters for novels and things, we're assigning them traits, and they should all have at least one positive and one negative trait, because nobody's perfect and we all have character flaws. It doesn't matter whether you're writing the hero or the villain. Nobody's perfect, and there should be a bit of a balance of positive and negative traits and different things. So characters that can do no wrong or characters that are just evil because they're evil are boring, and they're going to turn your audience and your readers off. Same thing when, if you're a TTRPG player and you're choosing an alignment for your D&D character, is the same kind of thing. Everybody's different and there's different aspects of it, and it's about people deciding for themselves what they believe is right and what they believe is wrong. And in our daily life, we're faced with choices all the time. Some of them are minor and karmically insignificant, like what to make for dinner. But other decisions are bigger and more important. So a business owner making a choice to fire an employee, while the employee might have done something wrong to deserve being fired, the impact isn't just on the business and the employee in question, but also potentially their family that rely on that paycheck. It's going to cost the business money to hire a replacement for them, all that kind of thing. And of course, you could argue that the employee had the choice not to do the thing that got them fired, and that's true too. And that's why these kinds of things are rarely so simple and straightforward, because there's nuance to it, and the same applies in video games. Sometimes two things can be true at once, even if they seem to conflict with each other, so I think it's important to bear that in mind. So, talking about games, we're playing a role. That's where a role-playing game comes from. But even if it's not strictly an RPG, you're still stepping into the shoes of a character. And generally, many games are offering us a chance to explore a narrative of some kind, a story in which we can determine the outcome. A lot of games have multiple endings and let you make decisions that are going to affect the ending, not just for the character you're playing, but often the story as a whole and the game world. Different games do this to different degrees and differing effectiveness, but many of the top RPGs have options and multiple endings. Many games let you choose a path if you're going to be good, evil, or neutral. And who doesn't love a morally grey character? Of course, choosing one path over another is going to have consequences, good or bad. Maybe how different NPCs respond to you, or what options you've got to resolve certain quests. So I thought we'd take a look at a couple of examples of some of the morality systems in games, and unsurprisingly, given the focus of my channel, we're going to start with Fallout. So Fallout's karma system or reputation system, it's been in the game since the beginning. So the classic Fallout games, Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, had a reputation system. In Fallout it was quite generalised and you had specific levels of positive or negative reputation that would have effects on certain events in the game. Fallout 2 also had town reputations as well as a general reputation system based on player actions. Of particular note in this one is the child killer reputation in classic Fallout, where you can do it, but everybody hates you and send bounty hunters after you, and people don't want to speak to you, don't want to deal with you, or are going to shoot you on sight because you did something that even evil characters think is despicable. So that was something in the games, but bear in mind that those games were not as well known as the franchise is nowadays. So when Bethesda took over the franchise, they chose to drop this altogether because otherwise their games would be denied classification in a lot of places, which would massively reduce their market. Fallout and Fallout 2 were only allowed to be sold in Europe after all children were removed from the game because of this ability to kill children and the perk associated with it, even though it's made quite clear in the game that it's not a good thing to do because everybody's going to hate you for it. But it was enough that the European decision was no, we're not letting you publish this game as it is. And you can find a quote from Tim Kaine where he said that they didn't have time to rewrite all the quests to change things, so they basically just deleted the children out of the game so it could be sold in Europe. And you have to remember the bottom line is video game developers are businesses, they want to make money, so they're not going to risk removing themselves from substantial market shares if their content is too controversial. See also South Park The Stick of Truth, although anyone buying a South Park game should really know what they're getting into. Matt and Trey don't like censorship at all, and that's kind of fair enough, but it's one of these things that they have to balance this, that sure, not being able to kill children is unrealistic, but it's going to cause issues and there's going to be upset around it, which would affect their bottom line because the game's not going to sell as well and they could lose, certain countries that would refuse to allow the game to be sold. All that kind of thing. So that's why they decided against it. Makes sense. I don't see the issue. But Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas do use the same kind of system. It's been kind of renamed as Karma. Although New Vegas does also have the faction reputation system, which is more reminiscent of Fallout 2. We're going to talk about both of these, but Karma is the main focus in Fallout 3, while the faction reputation system is more important in New Vegas. So Karma in the game, it's a hidden point system that ranges from -1,000 to +1,000, and your brand new character starts at 0. Each level has a Vault Boy graphic and title on your status screen on the Pip-Boy, depending on what your Karma level is when you level up. The original level cap of 20 meant that you would be the last best hope of humanity, a paradigm of humanity, or the scourge of humanity. And it would affect how Ron describes your character in the endings. So kind of straightforward, really. Karma is gained and lost based on things that you do in the game, so you would get positive karma for donating to the church, refusing a financial reward for a quest, killing a character that's designated as very evil, like Mr. Burke, or going into the purifier yourself to activate it. Makes sense. Negative karma is acquired by things like enslaving people, burning Harold to death, and blowing up Megaton. Sure, you can understand why these things are considered evil, but even small things like stealing and cannibalism also count, as well as murdering good people. Interestingly, stealing is -5 karma, while cannibalism is -1, which is a weird standard, but okay. And in Fallout 3, your karma level does matter for some things, so out of all the available companions, the only one that doesn't care about your karma level is Dogmeat, because he's the best boy. But Fox and Star Paladin Cross will only travel with you if you have good karma. Clover and Jericho will only travel with an evil character. Butch and Sergeant RL3 will only travel with a neutral character. RL3 is a bit weird about that, given that he's a robot, but that's how he works. So there are other things as well. So if you have good karma, you'll get gifts from Megaton citizens. So you'll often find every time you go into Megaton, somebody will come running up to you and give you a stim pack or chems or something. Evil characters are going to find it much easier to get access to Paradise Falls, and they can then get plenty of rewards for enslaving people. Again, makes sense. The final thing is quite major, really, is that there's two groups that are going to go after people with certain karma levels. So you've got the Talon Company mercenaries, who will go after good karma players for being too nice, and they like to wait for you outside metro stations and the like. On the other side of things, you've got the regulators, who will hunt you down for being evil. So only if you stay neutral are you going to avoid either of these hit squads coming after you. So it makes the wasteland safer for you to travel. So it does affect your companions that you can recruit, encounters that you'll have in the wasteland, and how some NPCs will respond to you. Lucas Sims will say he likes the look of you if you have good karma, while the slavers respect you if you've got evil karma. But in Fallout 3, because of the hit squads and things, staying neutral actually makes the wasteland safer, and it also lets you make good use of the impartial mediator perk for speech checks. Which, is something that you might want to consider when you're playing the game. In terms of reputation, it's very localised, so it rarely follows you to other settlements, which means that you can make choices based on the more immediate pros and cons when you're deciding who to help or which side to pick, and different quests and things like that. And in New Vegas, the karma system works the same way, except by and large, the companions and NPCs don't really care. Cass will get upset if your karma gets too low, but people are more focused on your reputation with the various factions in the game. So, Boone isn't going to tolerate you cozying up to the Legion, for example. He's going to be very upset about that. He has his reasons for that. So what that means is that most quests in New Vegas, you're being asked to choose which faction to help or hurt instead of necessarily deciding on the morality of it. You're like the one at Helios 1, where you're choosing where to direct the electricity and things. Do you want to just do it for the NCR, or do you want to power up the super weapon, that kind of thing? So it's more about kind of which faction and which side you want to take. Of course, you could kind of argue that siding with the Legion is probably less moral than the NCR. But understandably, attacking a faction is not going to give them a high opinion of you. And when you look at the endings of Fallout New Vegas, they're all a mixture of good and bad outcomes. There's no one perfect ending where everyone's happy and living their best life, which is realistic, and it makes for a good story. Sometimes there needs to be sacrifices or compromises to win the day. For another well-known example, if you look at Avengers Endgame, the good guys won in the end, but they lost Natasha and Tony. People actually died because they were fighting a massive intergalactic battle for existence. The fact that they only really lost two people, important people, is kind of amazing, actually. But that's part of the way these things work, and it's far more realistic that people are going to get hurt, people are going to lose, and there's going to have to be compromises and sacrifices made. So even in New Vegas, if you side with the NCR, the society is probably better for the people, but the locals don't really like the fact that they're having to pay these high tax rates that the NCR is demanding. The Legion might bring peace, but at the cost of freedom and autonomy. Vegas under Mr. House is described as Mr. House continued to run New Vegas his way, a despotic vision of pre-war glory. The streets were orderly, efficient, cold. So, again, different kind of thing. Peaceful potentially, but maybe not the happiest place. And if you do Yes Man's Ending, then it does result in quite a bit of chaos, although it's a bit better controlled if you've upgraded the Securitrons. They can get things under control a bit better. And another example is that Mr. House responds differently in his ending depending on what your karma level is at the end of the game. So if you have good karma, he's proud of you and he wants to keep working with you. So he's quite happy with you and he wants you to keep working for him because you've proven capable. And that's the way he likes it. But if you have evil karma, he spoils you rotten out of fear that if you decide you don't like what he does, you're going to harm him, you're going to maybe break into his chamber and kill him. So he's just like throwing everything that you want at you to keep you on side. But he's obviously kind of scared that if you decide you've had enough of him, they might do something against him. So, and I say I've talked about this a lot with the TV series, especially season 2, because it's focused a lot on Mr. House. And that's one thing about him and how he's so successful at predicting what people are going to do and how he's shaped everything the way he wants it to be is because he understands people. He understands how people think and he understands how people work to a degree. It's part of why he is so clever is that he can predict people because he understands human behaviour. So he knows that he's got to keep this person on side. I mean, they got the job done, which is great, but he needs to make sure that they're going to stay on his side. So he's going to do what he can to ensure that happens because it's going to give him a bit more safety. All kind of makes sense, but other than that, really, karma is fairly minor in New Vegas. Your faction reputation is far more important. If you befriend all the minor factions like the Boomers and the Enclave Remnants, then it makes the final battle a lot easier because they show up to help. Making factions angry at you will make the wasteland more dangerous, especially the Legion and also the NCR do this as well, where they send assassins after you constantly. Now, if we look to Fallout 4, you can drop the karma system altogether, but it's added a companion affinity system instead, which can grant you some useful perks if you make them like you enough. And it's kind of realistic that, the companions, they all have their own viewpoints and beliefs. So Strong likes you eating people because he does that. Hancock likes you using chems because he does that. Kate, her opinion on chem use actually switches, so if you do her personal quest and help her with her addiction problems, she goes from approving of you using chems to disapproving of you using chems. But most of the NPCs that you deal with in Fallout 4 don't really react much to your reputation. In Nuka World, where you're choosing between being a raider and destroying them and picking 2 out of the 3 groups of raiders and having to lose one of them, that plays a big role, and obviously depending on your choices you're going to end up enemies with certain groups of people. Preston also gets really angry at you joining the raiders, but unfortunately all that does is mean that he won't speak to you anymore. There's nothing else you can do with that. And a similar thing happens in Far Harbour. Again, it's it's taken a leaf out of New Vegas's book, these DLCs, because you're presented with these different factions that are working against each other, and you have to decide who to side with, who to support, and who to destroy. So, and that makes these stories more engaging because you can't make everybody happy, and you're going to have to choose who loses and deal with the consequences of that choice. And that's what makes a story compelling for somebody, whether you're reading a book or you're playing a game or watching a movie. Having that, choice and having that emotional kind of, well, I'm going to have to sacrifice this, or I'm going to have to kill this person, and I really don't want to, and it makes it more engaging. And companions are going to express opinions about the ending in the post game. You know, they will say, "Oh, I can't believe you blew up the institute without letting all the people evacuate," or whatever. But they don't really tend to turn on you unless they are members of the factions, the major factions that you've become enemies with, which makes sense. You're going to end up killing Dan's or Deacon if you attack their factions. That's not a surprise, really. And I think the old karma system, it wasn't perfect. And I'll talk more about how it actually works and what I think about it later. But I do think that Fallout 4 would have benefited from having a broader kind of reputation system of some sort. Because even your settlers seem to forget who you are, and being general of the Minutemen means nothing. Neither does becoming director of the Institute. Nobody cares. It's only when you attack a faction or pick a side that they care who you are. I feel like that could have been made better. And then going on to another of my favourite game series, which is Dragon Age. Both Fallout 3 and Dragon Age Origins were games that I bought. It was after I graduated from university and I was struggling to find a first job as a vet that was suitable for me. And I did get quite depressed because I didn't really have anything to do after 5 years of intensive study. I had nothing to do with my time. And I got a PlayStation 3 for my birthday at the end of 2009. And while I was applying for jobs and all the rest of it, and I picked up both Fallout 3 and Dragon Age Origins from my local game shop on a whim because they looked interesting and I had a great time. And that's kind of where this all started, really, for me. So both these games are games that I look back on very fondly, because they were a light in a time in my life where things were not so good. You know, my mental health was starting to suffer. You know, the job hunting process, I'm sure some of you can sympathise with that. It's not an easy thing to do sometimes, and you're, you know, getting rejections and all the rest of it, but playing these games really helped me in that situation. And Dragon Age Origins is still one of my favourite games of all time. But there's no overt karma system in Dragon Age, but your choices do have significant consequences, especially when you're recruiting allies. You get the chance to do good things and evil things, and most of the major quests have an optimal solution in Origins. The most ideal, although it doesn't always work right. You're supposed to get both the mages and the Templars if you do the optimal solution at the circle, but there's an issue with the game where it doesn't really work that way. But even, you know, the optimal solution can result in someone's death, such as Zathrian in the Dalish. He has to die in order to break the curse and free the werewolves and all the rest of it. So it still can be a little bit kind of bittersweet. I also think the Orzammar quest is a bit like that, because it doesn't really matter which side you choose. Neither Balin or Haramont are good people in my eyes, so you have to kind of choose who you dislike the least. Because I think they both have problems as well. But again, because it's a party-based RPG, your companion reputation and your affinity with them matters, because you're going to need a team to succeed. So you might not want to lose specific companions, and they can turn on you, they can choose to leave, you can send them away, or they might attack and force you to have to kill them. So Zevran is a well-known example. He's an optional companion. You can just kill him the first time you meet him after you knock him out. But if you recruit him and then later on towards the end of the game, he's confronted by one of his former partners in the Crows, and they are just like, yeah, we'll just let's deal with this now, and we can make up a story and everything's going to be fine. So Zevran then has to decide, is he going to stay on your side, is he going to fight you, or is he going to just walk away? So it depends on how much he likes you. So when you're facing off against Taliesin and Denerim, Zevran's personal quest, if he's neutral and he's not romanced, he'll just kind of stay out of it and potentially just leave. If he likes you, or if you've been romanced, he will stay with you. And if he really dislikes you, then he will turn on you, and you'll have to kill them. Similar thing happens at the Urn of the Sacred Ashes. So your companions have their own agency and their own belief about different things. So if you choose to defile the Sacred Ashes, and you've got Liliana and Wynne with you, you're going to have a bad time, because you're going to have to kill them, and given that Wynne's really your only healer, it's not going to be easy. But, when you're preparing for the Landsmeet, again, towards the end of the game, if you go around and do all the side quests for the nobles, then it makes things easier because most of them are going to side with you. There's always that one guy that always sides with Loghain, but you'll get more of them on side, and that makes that whole thing a bit easier for you to succeed. But the problem, I think, with the companion approval system here is that it's far too easy to exploit with gifts and careful choices on which companions you take to certain places. It still allows for some roleplay, but it does feel like there's just too many optimal solutions that are a bit too perfect. Especially when they added in those gifts that can basically max out friendship or reduce it to zero instantly. So you can tweak things and change things to suit the way you want instead of it happening organically. I did like how you could see the impact of on the world of your decisions in Origins. So you transfer your save file into Dragon Age 2, and then you can kind of transfer that on into Inquisition as well. Wasn't a huge impact, but it did change things, and it could add encounters and side quests depending on what decisions you made in the previous games. It's kind of a shame that when Veilguard came out, that was largely dropped. I feel like that could have probably been, it was something that BioWare did well, writing these complex, realistic characters and giving them agency. I mean, sure, making almost all the companions that were romanceable in Dragon Age 2 being player sexual was a misstep, and I'm glad they fixed that in Inquisition, because in real life, people have different sexualities and preferences, that's normal. Characters that refuse to go along with certain things or express their own opinions on your choices makes them all feel more real, and it makes the story more engaging. So, what about role-playing as an evil character? For me personally, I struggle to play as an evil character in most games. My first playthroughs of most RPGs come down on the good side, morally speaking. I have achievement hunted certain games. I'm pretty sure in Dragon Age Origins I have got a platinum trophy on the PlayStation Network. But, there was definitely didn't feel good about doing certain things just in order to get the achievements for it. And thanks to everyone that answered my poll on the channel. At the time of writing this, I had 14 responses, and 71% were heroic, 7% neutral, and 21% who said both or other. Nobody picked evil at all, and the comments were also really great, talking about how taking the heroic option being impossible in real life, which is often true, and that it's a luxury to have the choice of helping people when people are living in survival mode. So thanks for that, because it's absolutely true. Life is hard. Most of us are working to make ends meet, dealing with the rising costs of living, illnesses, health problems, finding housing. There's war, and there's a lot of complicated stuff happening politically in the world right now. There's a lot. Life is difficult, just getting through each day. It would be an amazing thing to be able to just go out and save the world from evil, but in real life that's not really an option for the majority of us, and often those that do have the means to enact real change often choose not to. So being able to do that in a game, to go and make a real difference and save the world, it feels good. And my sample size is small, but there have been studies showing that gamers on the whole do choose a heroic path over an evil path. And I took a look at the achievement stats for Fallout New Vegas on Steam. So here's the percentage of players who have obtained the ending achievements for all 4 of the endings. So Bene Vidi Vici was 4.5%, No Gods No Masters was 11.7%, Eureka was 7.8%, and The House Always Wins was 6.3%. So the Independent Vegas was the most common one, then the NCR, then Mr. House, and then the Legion. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? And I think it's a question of how much of when we're playing a game, we're playing as ourselves and making the choices that we think we would make if this was our real life, rather than playing a character that has different values or morals to us. And don't get me wrong, playing a villain can be fun, and many actors do say this. It doesn't mean that you're an evil person. As long as it's fictional and it's not crossing over into the real world, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And certainly, when it comes to like Skyrim and also Oblivion, I do always end up joining the Dark Brotherhood. I really enjoy the Dark Brotherhood questline. I really enjoy the Thieves Guild questline in Skyrim. Because what's the harm, really? It's just pixels on a screen. But thinking about the first Dark Brotherhood contract, so once you join the Dark Brotherhood and you're sent out to kill Narfi, so you're being paid to kill a mentally ill homeless man who's trying to find his lost sister. It's a bit harsh. But the thing about it is that doing things, evil playthroughs or joining the Dark Brotherhood, it does let us explore these objectionable acts in a way that harms no one, and it lets us figure out how we really feel about them. So in real life, and you've probably gathered this by now if you've been around for a little while, I'm a very empathetic person. Shouldn't come as a big surprise. I was a vet for a long time, and that involves having empathy for people and animals. I've shed tears over animals that were not my own. I've cried with clients when they brought their beloved pets in for their final appointment. I've had to walk a line between caring but not caring too much because it would destroy me emotionally. Compassion fatigue is a real thing. It can be so difficult, you've got this wee old man whose wife died 2 years ago, and his wee old dog, and it's all he's got left is the dog, but the dog has to be put to sleep, and it's heartbreaking. It's really, really sad because animals mean so much to people, and it's one thing about being a vet. Everybody talks about, puppies and kittens and focusing on the animals, but you're also playing a big role in the person's life, and you're, having potentially difficult conversations with these people and things, and you have to show that you care, but if you care too much, you're going to destroy yourself in the process, because you can't be so detached and cold that you stop caring about the animals or the people. It's a fine line, and it is part of the reason that mental health issues are so rife in the veterinary industry. Because the thing about it is that morality, it's not always clear cut and easy. It's not black and white. Killing someone is not always the evil thing to do. So the example I'm bringing here is the opening of Dragon Age 2, when Aveline realises that her husband has the blight and there's no wardens left to be able to save him. With the joining, Flemeth is like, nothing we can do. He's done for. So Aveline then has to decide whether to kill her husband or to leave him to die or become a ghoul. Hawk has the option of saying yes you should, or saying it's up to you, or doing it themselves. But given, the blight sickness and how it's going to kill him basically, and it's going to be a horrible, painful death. So killing him quickly, it's a mercy, because he's going to die anyway, but you might as well make it quick so that he's not suffering. And that's what euthanasia is. That's, it's a humane death. It's preventing suffering. And then later on in the game, Hawk can face this choice themselves with their sibling. If you take their sibling, whether it's Carver or Bethany, to the deep roads and you don't bring Anders with you, they're going to die. And again, you're going to have to kind of face up to that. And then again, with what happens to Hawk's mother, which is horrendous. That was a hell of a quest line. And she's basically become the Bride of Frankenstein, and you also then have to basically make the choice for your character to kill their own mother. And it's what makes these games so good, is that these stories are here and it's not all clean and it's not all shiny, and it's messy and it's difficult and there's no right answer. And whatever you decide, somebody's going to pay the price for it. It's really... and that's kind of the way a lot of these things work. And Fallout brings up this kind of situation and this question quite a lot. Harold in Fallout 3 asks you to end his life because he's miserable and he can't do anything about it himself because he's now a tree and rooted to the spot. The inventor of Nuka-Cola is stuck with just his head in a machine in a tiny vault where he's had nobody to talk to for 200 years. He wants to die, and for me, I think killing him is a mercy. And again, I bring back my experience as a vet of carrying out euthanasia and helping pet owners make that choice when it's appropriate, because that's the definition. It's a humane death and it's about preventing suffering. And bearing in mind that physical pain is not the only way that a living thing can suffer. You can have mental distress, you can have emotional distress. There's all sorts of reasons that somebody could suffer, and if there's nothing that can be done to improve that situation, then it can be the right choice. But making that choice is still going to be associated with guilt and questions of, did I do the right thing? Was that the right thing to do? It's complicated, and that's the way it is. But you can have fun sometimes playing as an evil character. There can be fun to it. There's no real consequences in a video game, so if you do want to blow up Megaton, if you want to kill everyone you meet in Whiterun, especially that guy that talks about the Cloud District, or if you want to play a game of Civilization 6 where you just nuke all of your opponents, you can do that. It's a safe way of exploring the darker side of ourselves and doing things that we would never do in real life. So it can be fun, but it doesn't mean that you're a bad person inherently. Again, we play games, we watch movies. It's all for having an experience and getting involved in a story. And stories are just about people and about the world and about exploring how things work. That's what it boils down to. So, playing a game as an evil person or somebody that's kind of morally grey and neutral in terms of their alignment, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it can be entertaining, because you're not really harming anybody. It's only if you bring that to the real world and start actually harming real people, that's when it's going to be a problem. So let's talk about how morality is handled. So we have spoken about how Fallout's karma system works, and I do like the mechanic in theory, but I think its execution is lacking. So you get a notification on the screen that the metric is changing, you've lost karma, you've gained karma. That means that you don't get to judge the morality of your decision because the game is doing that for you. And it's not awful, but I do wonder if it would be more interesting if you only see what your karma level is when you level up, or if you check the status screen and you don't get little pop-up notifications telling you, oh, that was a good thing you did or that was an evil thing you did, that you're gaining or losing karma. It is also far too easy to manipulate it because you can just go and steal stuff or just throw hundreds of caps at the church to change your karma level, which you might find useful if you do want to have a specific companion or if you've got impartial mediation and you need to get back to neutral. But it does mean that you can basically manipulate it to suit you. And it has a minimal impact on NPCs other than the bounty hunters. It doesn't really affect their disposition much. And it could have been factored into things like your speech check successes in Fallout 3 by boosting or lowering the percentage calculation depending on who you were trying to persuade. Because the way speech checks work, it's not just your speech skill. Like New Vegas, you just have to have your speech skill over a certain threshold. But in Fallout 3, your speech skill and your charisma stat are factored in, and there's a multiplication, so it's a percentage chance to succeed. So potentially karma level could have impacted that if you're trying to persuade a good person, having good karma would make it easier, while having evil karma would make it harder, that kind of thing. Or, impacting the barter prices in shops, that people might give you a better price if you've got a good reputation, that kind of thing. And I think that's the thing, is that it's not tied to any kind of reputation mechanic. And especially in New Vegas, where your faction reputation matters a lot, nobody really cares about your karma level in that game, just your faction reputation, which, don't get me wrong, I love the faction system. I think it's really good. I think it can work really, really well. But it kind of makes it feel like the karma system is just pointless in New Vegas, and it's just there as a leftover from Fallout 3, because it doesn't really make much difference other than certain achievements and the way the ending slides are worded. It could have been integrated better or removed from New Vegas, in my opinion, but obviously conscious that time limitations impacted the development of New Vegas, So possibly there wasn't really time for them to find a way to work karma into the game better, and connect it to the reputation system. And Fallout 4 dropped it in favour of the companions and the factions, but it's far less complex and even easier to exploit. You can get multiple companions to love you forever just by using power armour and picking locks and quick loading the game, which you can easily exploit in order to get the perks, and then you can just leave them at Sanctuary forever and it doesn't matter. The Fallout 4 companions only really turn on you when you become enemies with their faction, the major factions, so Paladin Dance, Deacon, and X688. Preston won't, because he's the yes man of the game. He's the default option if you fall out with everyone else, so that you've still got the ability to end the game. He only complains about your choices and gets mad if you join the Nuka World Raiders. And of course, Dogmeat's the best boy, and he's your friend no matter what, at least. But it feels like, you get these titles that you're the director of the Institute or you're the general of the Minutemen, but it means nothing because you're still the one doing all the work. And again, I don't know how they could have fit the karma system in, but I think having a more general reputation system in Fallout 4 would have been nice, that people in other settlements had heard how you'd done this, and you've rescued this person from these raiders, and you wiped out all these super mutants in this place, and that kind of thing, that people might be nicer to you because you're doing a lot of good stuff. Or if you're not doing good stuff, that maybe they would be less willing to talk to you, or they wouldn't want to trade with you, stuff like that. It probably could have been incorporated, but I think the thing about it is that the execution is not as good as it potentially could have been. And then looking at BioWare's RPGs, I say I've played Dragon Age a lot more than I've played Mass Effect, but I have played some Mass Effect. And again, the games do tend to highlight this is the good option, this is the evil option, and they don't really let you decide for yourself which choice you think is good or evil, because morality is not set in stone and it's not always a simple decision. So in Mass Effect, it does impact how people respond to Shepard, and you do even have visual changes in the character model as you progress down the Paragon or Renegade pathway. It adds options for charming people, persuading people, intimidating people through your dialogue and cutscenes. And Dragon Age mainly focuses on companions and who joins your side. Dragon Age is set in a dark fantasy world, to be fair. Everything's terrible there, for the most part. But you're deciding on who you agree with, so are you picking mages or Templars, Dalish or the werewolves, all that kind of thing. And you can have serious consequences where companions can leave you or attack you and force you to kill them, like we mentioned about Liliana, Wynne and Zevran. I think Sten can also be killed by you, depending on your choices. And in the later entries to the series, it feels like this has been watered down a little bit, and there's less impact from your choices. You still end up being a hero of some kind, but you can and do see the consequences of your actions and your choices. I think some of them you can send the characters away, more than them choosing to leave. Some of the decisions are definitely in the grey area of morality, which is a good thing because it's realistic and it makes the story more interesting, because you want the player to stay engaged with the game. And I have mainly focused on games that I'm the most familiar with, the ones that I've played repeatedly and really enjoy. But there's plenty of other games that have brought up these kinds of issues too. Soma is a favourite of mine. I really, really enjoyed that game. And again, it's asking you to make difficult choices, including whether you want to let the last living human die at her request. And the narrative of Soma really explores issues of kind of identity and survival, and how to preserve the last remnants of humanity on a dead world. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be human? Is a copy in a computer just as good as the real life person? All that kind of stuff really gets into that and asks you to basically decide who gets to stay and who doesn't, and all that kind of thing. It's really, if you've not played Soma, I would highly recommend it. It's a very, very interesting story. And then we'll go back to, quite some time ago. I'm not actually going to look up how long ago this was because it's just going to make me feel old. But I'm sure some folk will remember when Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 came out, there was a mission in that game called No Russian, where you are playing as an undercover agent and you go into an airport and gun down a bunch of civilians. And this sparked a huge controversy for good reason. It was far more graphic and so different from the other single player levels in COD, where, you know, you're just shooting enemy soldiers and you're on the battlefield and all the rest of it. And the game, they did let you skip the mission without any penalty, but it does bring up questions about morality and about glorifying certain kinds of violence. You know, and I remember that there was a lot of talk about it and a lot of people were quite upset about it. I did play through the level once just out of curiosity, and it definitely didn't feel good to do. And understandably, since then, they have by and large stayed away from that kind of thing, realising that it's not um, it's not something that is that comfortable. It's not to say that we should always avoid things that are uncomfortable, but you know, that kind of thing, it didn't really need to be there because the character that you played in that level died at the end anyway, so it it seemed quite inconsequential overall. So potentially there wasn't really a need for that mission to be there at all. But yeah, and I think that brings us to the conclusion here that I have, which is about making moral decisions. And you know, it's we make choices all the time on a daily basis. We make decisions, but not all of them are simple. You know, there's not much morality about choosing pizza toppings, pineapple debate notwithstanding. But other things can be complicated when we're considering the impact of our choice. And when it comes to morality and ethics, there's often no single correct answer. And people use all kinds of things to make decisions: knowledge, past experience, religious beliefs, political views, following the crowd. Most people don't really want to stand out for the crowd or feel like they're being judged by others. Sometimes people will make a choice that hurts them because they don't want to upset someone else. But putting yourself first sometimes is the right thing to do. Even if someone calls you selfish, protecting your peace, protecting your boundaries is not necessarily the wrong thing to do, and it's rarely that simple. Even villains believe that they're in the right, at least good villains do. I say good villains like realistic villains in fiction. And some of the most evil people in history believed that they were doing the right thing or that they had no other choice than to do something reprehensible. Of course, there are outliers who do evil things just because they want to, but playing games where we get to decide the fate of the wasteland, the kingdom, a universe, whatever, it lets us explore our own moral compass in a safe way. It lets us decide how we feel about certain things and reflect on what we're seeing in the real world. And while it's been proven that most gamers seem to prefer to stay on the side of good, role-playing as a bad guy can be fun too. And it's a safe way to explore that kind of thing where no real person is harmed, as long as it stays that way. Game systems have limitations and it's impossible to account for everything, but sometimes these systems can be manipulated and exploited, sometimes in ways that the developers never anticipated. But it can also prevent autonomy when it comes to storytelling. And there's times I think that the morality systems kind of feel pointless. In New Vegas, as I said, the karma really doesn't mean very much. Your faction reputation is what changes how people respond to you in the game. You know, attacking the Legion makes them angry at you. That's fair enough. And you could argue that siding with certain factions is an evil thing because the faction is inherently evil, like the Legion or the Enclave. But it's rarely so simple. I just feel that, you know, in New Vegas, the karma system either needed to maybe be affected by your faction reputation more, or just didn't need to be there. But it can be fun to explore the dark side of humanity sometimes, and choosing to do an evil run of a game doesn't mean that you'd behave like that in real life, I would hope. Because in real life, no matter how good a person seems to be, there's always complexity. I'm a compassionate person, I have empathy, and I will judge people based on their actions, not assumptions. But I despise dishonesty, and if I find out someone's lied to me, I will walk away. I have done in the past, and I do also tend to hold grudges for quite a long time. I make mistakes. I've said hurtful things when I've been angry with people in my life. I've done things that are definitely not good things to do. Because even when we try to do the right thing all the time and we try to be good, nobody's perfect. And that's the point. So, yeah, hopefully you find that very interesting. As I said, morality is it's not something that's ever black and white in my opinion. There's always kind of shades of grey, and different people are going to have different feelings, and we might not agree on certain things, or we might agree on certain things. But as always, I do love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the karma system in Fallout? What do you think about the way things were in Bioware's RPGs? Any other games that present interesting moral questions? Let me know what you think in the comments, because I love to hear it and I love to chat about stuff like this with you guys, because I think it's really interesting. And I say this video essay is obviously by and large my perspective on things based on, you know, my personal moral compass and my feelings and things like that. And different people are going to see things differently, and I think that's very interesting to engage with that as well, and see how other people feel about things, and how, you know, different experiences and different beliefs can, you know, change things. You know, I always like to keep an open mind, because I say I'm not perfect. Nobody is. Nobody's perfect, and it's okay to be wrong sometimes, but it's also okay to put yourself first sometimes, and, you know, being prioritizing yourself isn't necessarily, you know, people might call it selfish if you're trying to enforce a boundary, but that's kind of their problem, not your problem. And all we can do is the best that we can, to do things the way we believe that we should, and it's something that could be very personal, but I do always love seeing other people's perspectives and things, so I do tend to keep quite an open mind about stuff like that. So let me know in the comments your thoughts, and I will catch you guys later with some more videos. Bye!